Looking for a guaranteed way to create content that resonates with your audience? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients and let them choose the topic of the interview. Because if your ideal clients care about the topic, there's a good chance the rest of your audience will care about it too. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Sean Blackburn with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Brian Kotlyar. He is the head of demand generation and growth at Intercom. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm stoked to talk about our topic today. And, I think it's something that a lot of us B2B marketers and salespeople are interacting with more on a daily basis. But we're going to be talking about when to use chatbots and when not to. Before we jump into that, though, if you could tell our listeners a little bit about you and your background and what it is that you guys do over at Intercom.
As you mentioned, Sean, I lead demand generation and growth marketing here at Intercom. What Intercom is, it's a customer messaging platform that helps companies grow faster through better relationships. And what that means in practice for, the sales folks and marketing folks out there is we provide sort of messaging solutions and chatbots that help you engage your prospects more effectively on your website, convert them into leads and opportunities or customers more effectively. And then once they're a customer, what's really unique about Intercom is it helps you kind of nurture them through their journey as a customer. It's kind of a full life cycle approach that allows you to take somebody from anonymous prospect all the way to happy, loyal customer, always through the idea of messaging. So using sort of the idea of messaging and chat as the new and kind of better interface for how you interact. Sort of how I came into this role is I've been working in B2B SaaS for a long time. This is sort of my second hypergrowth company. Prior to this, I led a very similar role. I led the demand generation team at Sprinkler, where we went from about 90 employees up to about 1,300, and from a relatively small valuation to almost $2 billion by the time I'd left, which was quite a whirlwind. And prior to that, I led B2B marketing for a company called Dachis Group, where we sort of helped the earliest business adopt social media and social technology to enable them to kind of sell and grow. So it's been a fun 10, 15 years in the world of B2B SaaS.
I love that. And man, hypergrowth is a good way to say what your background has been in. And, I'm excited to talk about chatbots because it's something that is, a really hot topic within, especially B2B marketing, B2B sales. Before we kind of jump into some of your methodology on it, you mentioned messaging kind of being the primary, lens that you guys see this through. But what would you define a chatbot as overall?
Sure. I mean, there's probably some really clever, dry academic definition. But
not looking for that. Yeah. Practical.
The practical way of looking at this is essentially these things tend to be these days, because I think there's a very cool AI future out there, but these days they tend to be fairly straightforward automation systems with some lightweight machine learning attached to them that can sit on top of primarily text-based channels like email and chat and messaging and help offer answers, speed up interactions, and just generally enable a scaled kind of conversational experience without having to have tons and tons of people driving that conversation. And that's really kind of like the magic of them. You can give your visitors or customers this incredibly fast, thoughtful, high quality, engaging experience without having to have 75 people in a call center somewhere typing words into a little box. And so kind of it's one of those amazing pieces of technology where everybody wins. The customers and prospects are getting a better, faster, more customized experience. And the business is getting to the outcome they want to get to, but without compromising the customer experience or having to staff up some crazy team at great expense to drive the conversation.
Yeah, I really like the way that you guys are looking at this too. You mentioned messaging kind of being the centering, kind of lens that you guys are looking at this through. Whenever you say that, what does it mean to you in the terms of messaging in relation to how to use a chatbot?
So I guess where I would start is just this idea that I can ask you this question, Sean. I hope you answer the way I want you to, but if you don't, it's okay. But if you go to a landing page and you're confronted with three options of interactions you can take to talk to a company. One is a 1-800 number. Another is an email form. And the third is like a blinking cursor that says messages and talk to me right now. Which of those three things are you going to typically choose to talk to that company?
I think it's the right answer, but it's the true one for me. It's definitely the cursor down at the bottom of the page that's asking me to do a quick chat.
Well, thank you. I hope you're not lying, but even if you are, so and that's really like that right there. That simple insight is the core reason why messaging is such a big deal. Every single person, pretty much all of the time, with rare exceptions, would prefer to have an instantaneous messaging-based conversation with a company, or frankly also with their friends and stuff, but certainly with a company, than the prior technologies that were available. You don't want to write a letter, you don't want to send an email, and you rarely want to call it. Right. And once you have that insight, what you realize is, oh my goodness, businesses are not ready for this. They don't have a chat business process in place, software in place, all that stuff to enable those messaging conversations. And messaging is only getting bigger. Like if you open up your phone in the morning, how many different messaging inboxes do you have for all your different applications? Like messaging is slowly eating how people talk to one another and is slowly eating how businesses and people talk to one another. And so you kind of start there with that idea of the inbox and the sort of the direct message and Facebook message and Apple message and whatever. And what you realize is businesses just aren't ready, and they're not ready for a host of reasons. They need tech, they need process, they need measurement, they need staffing, all these things that are unsolved for what is quickly becoming this like really disruptive, different way that businesses need to figure out how to talk to their customers.
I think you nailed it. I was actually, this might seem boring, so bear with me, but I was actually just reorganizing my iPhone apps the other day and decided to make an entire folder for messaging because you're absolutely right. The apps that I eating up most of my time with is messaging, Slack, Marco Polo, Facebook Messenger, like you mentioned, and, text messaging being the most dominant one, obviously. As consumers are changing their habits, you mentioned businesses kind of feel behind. Do you think that that's going to stay that way? Or obviously you guys have had a lot of hyper growth at Intercom. What's some of the trends that you see when it comes to how businesses are kind of shifting to this model of messaging rather than, like you mentioned, typical helplines or email forms to fill out?
So I think the first thing I would say is, it's probably like more fun if I'm really dramatic and like messaging is changing everything. You stop sending emails, stop, throw your phone out the window. But to me, this is a yes and type situation, not an or. You kind of need the right tool for the job. Messaging is not the right tool for every kind of interaction you want to have. And we should just acknowledge that up front. But with that said, it is the right tool for a huge proportion of what companies want to do. And there's a lot of different scenarios where you'd want to put it in there. But one great example is we have one customer I was sitting with recently, and they told me that they're about to embark on an entire website rebuild, very, very fast-growing B2B company. And they're rebuilding their entire website around the idea that they want the primary call to action that people take is to chat with them. And they want to do it using Intercom. And what they found is, and we've seen this as well in our own data, is that the speed of with which you can kind of convert an interested or somewhat interested person over into a highly engaged prospect and then pull them into your pipeline to go ahead and close them is unparalleled for chat. You can essentially collapse a huge amount of research behavior and interaction and fairly expensive marketing and selling that you have to do into a very short period of time, just through the combination of them browsing your website and engaging with that chat. And I think that's a pattern that we're going to see more and more is businesses need to think about not just slapping a little widget in the bottom right corner of the website, which, it's not a bad thing to do, but also starting to think about, okay, how do we want to kind of build a buying journey and a buying experience that takes advantage and features this really, really powerful means of communication. Did that answer your question, Sean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that that's super interesting that it's speeding up the buying journey and, you're moving people through the funnel quicker with this messaging and a chatbot potentially. What are some of, you mentioned a lot of different business uses, but what are some of the, common ones that you guys are seeing at Intercom, people using chatbots for and succeeding with them?
So I would say there's basically just to like super simplify sort of the customer experience, right? You've got the front end where you're trying to engage a prospect and get them into your purchase flow. Then you've got the middle part where they've bought something and you're trying to sort of ensure that they're getting value from your products and sort of engaging with you. And then you've got the last part where you have sort of ongoing support and cross-sell and upsell. So let's imagine those three places. And chatbots play a role, and messaging play a role in each of those, and it's all slightly different. So on the way front end, which is, how you're going to drive like your top line, the ROI, is you can essentially add this into a lot of different high impact aspects of the purchase experience to speed things up and to add value. So you could put it on your pricing page, and you can set it up so that if somebody's on that page for a certain period of time or has other context, like they come from an account that you've been really trying to capture, you can trigger a chatbot to try and engage that person and to try to pull them into a purchase flow. You can set it up so that if somebody is consuming content and you're trying to drive up their lead score to justify some sales outreach, you can sort of understand who they are and then offer them additional content, and hopefully they'll consume that content, and sort of you can drive up their score and so on. So there's a lot of different sort of key insertion points that you can kind of, if you draw it on a whiteboard, the purchase flow you're trying to have and sort of the journey you're trying to have, places you can insert chatbots to sort of proactively intervene as they're engaging with your digital properties to get them to to sort of take actions and exhibit behaviors that make them have a higher propensity to buy and a higher propensity to talk to you. I'd also say once they're engaged, if you've sort of put the bot in the right place and you've captured their attention in the right place, there's a lot of really neat stuff you can do. I don't mean to make this a pitch, but one of the neat things you can do with Intercom is we have hundreds and hundreds of integrations and growing. And those integrations allow you to do a lot of really cool stuff. Like you can go click to essentially demo right inside a chat interaction. Cool. So you can bring somebody from totally anonymous to a live video conference with an SDR, like in a matter of seconds through a chat. Or you can just schedule a meeting with an account executive if the lead is pre-qualified. So again, you're trying to just basically compress a very complex B2B purchase process into a fairly short, contained set of steps. And you can do that really effectively with messaging in a way you cannot with email or phone or anything else, because you can't click to video conference on a mobile call, and you certainly can't do so in an email exchange. But you can essentially in real time in a chat.
Just to kind of drill in, I know that I definitely want to hear your thoughts on the other parts of the the customer journey as well, and how bots can help that. But I was talking on another B2B growth interview the other day, and we were just talking about how buyers' habits are changing, and people are raising their hand much later in the process. Do you think that within the buyer's journey that a bot maybe makes someone raise their hand and potentially interact and get out of just research mode and start asking questions faster than some traditional models?
I do believe that. And I think my perspective on it is basically this. It's like for anyone who's built a website, you're trying to anticipate questions people will have in all different contexts with which they're going to come to the website. And you're trying to answer them with this relatively static thing. And even with the world's best personalization, you're still only personalizing across like a pretty finite number of options and a finite number of like variables. And so in the end of it is you have this like pretty static thing that's trying to address a very, very, very dynamic buying process. And there's always this kind of this gap there, because you can't very easily anticipate everything. You don't know if they just came in off of like a rating and review site like GGCrowd or Trust Radius or something, and they saw some specific comment they're trying to explore. You didn't necessarily anticipate that and put that on the homepage for them. Now they're going to have to click all over the place inside your website to go find that information. And let's face it, we're not all like these amazing UX designers that can make, like, you and I have seen your typical B2B website, right?
Sure.
So the odds that you're going to get that right are pretty small.
Right.
The power of chat is that like they can just ask. They don't have to go 7 clicks deep into your website to go figure something out, if it's even there. You can have this very free-form conversational mechanism where they can do their discovery right there in the box. And you can, and on your side as a business, you're enriching all this information. You know their IP address, you know what link they came in on with what UTM parameter. You have your sort of data enrichment running, so you're pulling things out of your various backend systems to figure out where they work and what their title is and all that good stuff. And then if you're able to address their questions quick enough, like I said before, you can almost immediately book them for a proper discovery session with your sales team, go right into a sales interaction if you have sort of a really rapid sales cycle, and so on. So I just think that the flexibility of the chat mechanism is just, it's unparalleled in terms of, it's kind of like the hybrid of an email form and a phone call, and you're able to offer it right there on your website.
I love that. And so the obvious one, as far as application for a chatbot, is within that sales discovery, process where people are consuming and potentially customers and part of that buyer's journey. But you mentioned using chatbots for customer support and then also customer issues. What are some of those uses that you feel like chatbots could be helpful with in those scenarios?
I mean, I won't belabor it because I know that your audience is more sales and marketing oriented, but I do think there's some really important use cases for marketers and salespeople further down the funnel because,
Sure.
Churn is sort of, and customer, like losing logos you fought super hard and you paid out commissions to get is like the biggest pain of any growing business. And so there's this really powerful application of chatbots and messaging for, first of all, okay, you got the customer. Now, are they actually going to sort of activate and engage with your product? Like we've all bought stuff that we had every intention of using, and then it's just sat on the shelf for a few months, and we've either canceled it when the annual subscription was up or after a few invoices. And one of the great things about this technology is it can see that, oh, wow, Brian signed up. He's a perfect buyer. We know he wanted this thing. He's not doing it. And so now we can proactively message folks and try to get them to use the features of the product that are going to unlock the most value for them, or get me to invite a teammate into the product and do some other thing. And so basically what you can do is you can drive up activation and engagement with your new recent customers and help onboard them so that you basically mitigate churn and you're able to capture more value from the hard-won customers you've gotten. And we see a huge amount of ROI for a lot of folks that implement our software for that purpose as well. And it's cool because you're using the same, you've kind of trained them to talk to you on the front end with chatbots and messaging. Now you're sort of extending that experience into your software itself, into your product itself, to help them learn and take full advantage of the product. And if they have a question while they're doing it, like, oh, I don't exactly understand what you're trying to get me to do, they can just ask right there and there, and you can help them. So it's this really nice kind of two-way conversation for those early critical days of when they buy your product, where it's going to kind of make or break. Like the likelihood of you retaining that customer is almost entirely shaped by that first few uses of the product. And if you botch it, they're going to churn on you eventually, whether it's in a week or in a year. And then the last thing I would say is on the support side. Again, I know it's not the sort of the core audience, but we find that here at Intercom, and we've seen this with many of our customers, we can get about a 30% customer support question sort of like aversion when we implement chatbots. And so what does that mean? It means that we're answering people's questions without a human touching it. So there's a cost savings there. But much more importantly, we're answering the question correctly instantaneously with chatbots. And that's the biggest thing. Most questions you get are routine. And if a human being could just type fast enough, you could answer it in like a microsecond, but people can't do that. But when you put a bot in place, you can essentially resolve really, really simple, straightforward questions like instantaneously. And then you can allow your teams to focus on other stuff. So whether that's cross-sell and upsell, which we do a ton through messaging here at Intercom, or trying to get folks to sort of engage with higher value features in your products, whatever the case may be, the bots take a lot of the burden and a lot of the work of the routine stuff off of your sales and support teams so that you can actually focus on driving value.
Yeah, that's some really cool applications. And there's the other side of this. And, the other part of our title is when not to use chatbots. What are some of those applications that you feel like just are not a good fit?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that there's, like I sort of started at the beginning, like, let's not kid ourselves. There's a very cool, fancy AI future out there for this kind of technology. It's not now. The technology is not good enough to be a person, and acting like it is just upsets your prospects, upsets your customers, and puts you on kind of on the back foot in the interaction. So what we generally try to recommend is sort of embrace what the bot can do, which is simple, straightforward, like question triage, automated answering of routine questions, sort of intervention and engagement in sort of these planned ways where it's like, oh, 99% of the time when somebody gets to this part of the website, they want this piece of information. Well, let's just give it to them automatically based on things we know about them. And then on the other side, don't act like there's some super powerful, next generation Star Trek thing happening. Rather, if you start to kind of get to the boundaries of what the bot can do, just have the bot tap out and pass that interaction either to a form so you can follow up with the person if you don't have staffing, or right into your sales or support team so that they can engage with the person properly. And what we find is if you set expectations, people are super happy. If you misalign expectations, you get really frustrated people because they're like, wait, you told me you had, IBM Watson sitting there able to answer any question in the world, and it got confused after I answered one question. They get really frustrated. So I think that's a really key thing to understand from the start, just set expectations.
Brian, as a lot of our audience is in this B2B marketing and sales space where a chatbot might be a useful tool for them to add to their, kind of tool belt. What is sort of encouragement would you give to someone who's maybe not dipped their toe in this water yet? And, where should they start?
What I would do is it really just depends on sort of where you want to focus, but there's so much ROI you can unlock from the start here. So it's a question of what your level of comfort is. So if you're trying to kind of grow your business, I guess we all are trying to grow our business, but if your focus is really right now short-term revenue, I would identify sort of your highest value website pages, and I would deploy chatbots immediately into probably your pricing page, your contact me page, and maybe your key product pages as a way to sort of offer supplemental information and as an additional call to action to engage visitors that otherwise would bounce. You're spending all this money to get people to your website. Why don't you proactively engage them with some nice context? And I think you'll see that the ROI on Intercom or whatever you chose, just for that right there would justify the implementation. If you're not totally comfortable with putting something new on the website, something that's going to engage with your prospects, you could do what I was talking about, which is you can go a little further down the funnel. You can deploy it sort of behind your paywall as a way to sort of start to engage folks as if they get lost inside your product or if they have questions. And that's a great place to put chatbots as well, if you're a little bit more conservative. And just right there, in terms of the lift and activation you'll get from customers and lift and engagement, or the reduction in customer support, you'll pay for the tool again, right there. So I think it's really a question of what your risk tolerance is for sort of bringing this to the way front end of your business versus you want to kind of tiptoe into it through kind of lower funnel type interactions. But either way, I think what you would find is that you can really pay for the investment very, very, very quickly with any one of those three kind of metrics.
Well, Brian, this has been a great conversation, and I love your perspective on when to use chatbots and when not to. If anybody's listening and has any follow-up questions, would like to just talk with you or connect with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
Sure. So if you want to just track me down, I'm always available on LinkedIn. My last name's a little hard to spell, but you'll find me. Or on Twitter, just fine as well. And sometimes, occasionally, I'll appear on the Intercom podcast. So if you're a podcast fan, you're welcome to come and subscribe to the Inside Intercom podcast, where I occasionally talk about these topics, and we interview a lot of folks that discuss these kinds of topics all the time.
Awesome. Yep, absolutely. Check out the podcast as well, guys. And Brian, thanks again for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.